clarification required. We can go back, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Also, I'll provide my contact information at the end of the slide deck here, and you can feel free to email me as well if your question is a little bit more detailed and you'd prefer to type it out.
Keely, I just want to stop for a second. Can everyone hear? Everyone can hear? Yes? Okay.
Perfect. So just a quick disclaimer, these slides, as always, are just a summary of some of the sections of the legislation and should not be relied on for legal or official purposes. I do want to stress before I begin that I am not a lawyer and that you should always consult both the legislation and a solicitor and seek legal advice when necessary. Again, I'm not going to be able to cover every aspect of the municipal election with you today, but I hope that this slide deck can provide you with a better understanding of the process, the legislation, and can improve your comfort level surrounding the municipal election at least a little bit. So my presentation specifically some eligibility rules and requirements, the nomination process, campaign finances, compliance audit processes, the voters list, voting proxies, scrutineers, recounts, and then also some additional elections resources at the end. So you're considering running for municipal office. That's always very exciting, as local government is the level of government that is closest to the people and the most accessible and responsive to the needs of individual communities. So while Ontario's municipal governments deliver local services, the province establishes the legislative and policy framework. The Ontario government sets standards for local services such as land use planning, building regulations, social housing, and the province also provides the fund for those municipalities to deliver those services. The ministry also works in partnership with the municipal sector to support efficient and responsive local governments that are sustainable and investment ready. So local government is always a challenging environment with high expectations and limited resources, which means that you're often doing more with less. This means that you can't always make everyone happy. So council must make difficult decisions in the best interest of the municipality. Before we get into an overview of the Municipal Elections Act, I do want to provide a brief summary of the role of elected officials and staff. Please note that all of this information can also be found in the counselor's guides that are available on the ministry's website. And I believe the city also can distribute them as needed. So I'd encourage you, if you have any questions after this presentation, to take a look at the counselor's guide, as that provides a little more of an in-depth description of the roles and responsibilities and the relationship between elected officials and staff. So first, let me start by saying that Section 2 of the Municipal Elections Act stipulates that municipalities are created by the province to be responsible and accountable governments with respect to matters in their jurisdiction. So each municipality is given powers and duties under the Municipal Act and other pieces of legislation for the purpose of providing good government. The Municipal Act is a legislative framework for municipalities, which seeks to kind of balance the local autonomy and flexibility with the accountability and transparency of municipal operations. The key to any organization, including a municipality, another government, a business, an industry, a local service or club, is that everyone understands their respective roles, responsibilities, and their relationships between each other. So in the next few slides, we're going to review the role of the mayor, the mayor's role as the chief executive officer, the role of council, and the role of municipal staff, which is key to an effective and efficient local government. So as you can see on the screen, Section 224 of the Municipal Act does explain the role of council is to represent the public and to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality, to develop and evaluate the policies and programs of the municipality, to determine which services the municipality provides, to ensure that administrative and controllership policies, practices, and procedures are in place to implement the decisions of council, to ensure the accountability and transparency of the operations of the municipality, including the activities of senior management, to maintain the financial integrity of the municipality, and to carry out duties of council under the Municipal Act and other acts. It's also the role of council to conduct meetings, to pass bylaws, and to develop policies. There's just a few examples of the type of policies that council could develop and implement as a group. What is important to remember on this slide is that these actions are done as a collective group with all members of council each having one vote. The role of head of council specifically is outlined in section 225 of the Municipal Act. And it's the role of the head of council to act as the chief executive officer, to provide over council meetings so that its business can be carried out efficiently and effectively, to provide leadership to council, to provide information, recommendations to council on policies, practices, procedures to ensure transparency and accountability, to represent the municipality at its functions, and to carry out the duties of the head of council stipulated in the Municipal Act. Additionally, as the chief executive officer of the municipality, the head of council should uphold and promote the purposes of the municipality, promote public involvement, act as a representative and promote the municipality locally and elsewhere, and participate in and foster activities that enhance the economic, social, and environmental well-being of the municipality and its residents. So although the legislation refers to the head of council as the chief executive officer or CEO of the municipality, this is sometimes confusing to people with a business background. The head of council actually has very few powers that can be exercised independently of the rest of council, except where specifically delegated, such as in cases of an emergency or in the context of personal matters during a council meeting. The head of council has no greater power than any other individual member of council. And it's really important to note that council makes decisions not as individual members, but as a whole. That includes the rest, or the head of council, sorry. Just to clarify though, the head of council does always have a vote. There's sometimes confusion in the media and on the question of whether the mayor does have a vote, but the head of council can vote in all situations, not just in the case of a tie. Section 227 of the Municipal Act sets out the role of staff and officers and employees of the municipality. So the role of staff is to implement council's decisions and establish administrative practices and procedures to carry out council's decisions, to undertake research and provide advice to council on the policies and programs of the municipality, and to carry out other duties under the Municipal Act or any other act which assigns duties by the municipality. So some staff positions like the clerk, the treasurer, the chief building official, and the fire chief are positions that have statutory obligations. So it's important that council not interfere with the statutory obligations of these roles. So for example, the clerk and treasurer have statutory obligations that are outlined in the Municipal Act and other pieces of legislation. The Building Code Act defines statutory duties for the chief building official, and the Fire Prevention and Protection Act defines the statutory duties for the fire chief. So section 229 also outlines the role of the chief administrative officer, or the CAO. So the CAO is responsible for exercising general control and management of the affairs of the municipality for the purpose of ensuring the efficient and effective operation of the municipality and performing such other duties as are assigned by the municipality. The function of the CAO within the municipality is generally akin to the role of a CEO in the business world. The CAO is responsible for the general control and management of the day-to-day operations of the municipality, which includes developing and implementing appropriate internal administrative practices and procedures to ensure the efficient and effective and accountable operation of the municipality. So the best way that we like to describe the role of the CAO at the ministry is to kind of picture an hourglass on its side, and the CAO is kind of in the middle, that smallest part of the hourglass, with council being at one end and the rest of the municipal staff being at the other. So information between council and the rest of staff flows through the CAO. In the case that council wanted to provide direction to staff, that would go through the CAO. And in the case that staff would like to provide advice or recommendations to council, that also travels through the CAO. So council staff relations are also discussed in that counselor's guide that I mentioned earlier, and it provides a more fulsome explanation of how council and staff can work together. But this slide kind of provides you with a high-level overview. So as we know, councils and the administration have different roles within the municipality, but their roles have common goals and purposes. In general, it's the role of the elected council to represent the community and set the direction and policy for the municipality, while it's the role of staff to manage people and resources to achieve council's vision. So while council sets the policy direction, staff provides the research and expert advice to help council do so. Moving on just quickly to the role of a school board trustee. I'm unsure if anybody on the line is interested in the school board elections or running for school board trustee, but just quickly, school board trustees are members of the school board. They're locally elected representatives of the public, and they're the community's advocate for public education. Only the board, not an individual trustee, has the authority to make decisions or take action. A trustee is often the first point of contact for parents or concerned community members who have questions or concerns about their local school or school board. And for additional information on this, if you're interested in running for school board trustee, I encourage you to reach out to that local school board. Again, the role of a school board trustee is to establish policy direction and participate in making decisions that benefit the entirety of the school board while representing the interests of constituents. School board trustees are accountable to not only their constituents, but also the Ministry of Education and the families of children who attend schools within the school board. So moving on to eligibility and ineligibility to run for either council or school board. So to be an eligible elector, you must fit with the, on my screen it's green, it might show up as blue, but you must fit with the eligibility requirements that are outlined in that blue-green box there. So additionally, you can only be nominated to run for council if, as the day you're nominated, you are qualified to hold that office under the act and you're not ineligible under the Municipal Elections Act or any other act or otherwise prohibited by law to be nominated or to hold the office for which you're being nominated for. So under Section 30 of the Municipal Elections Act, it states that a person shall not be considered an employee for this section by reason of being a volunteer firefighter. So essentially, if you, in that ineligible box, that orange one below, it does say that you are ineligible to be nominated if you're an employee of the municipality, unless the leave of absence is taken. That does not count for those who are volunteer firefighters. But if you are any other position, you must take a leave of absence before filing your nomination. And then if elected, you will have deemed to be resigned from your employment immediately before making the declaration of office. Additionally, if you wish to run for school board trustee, you are not allowed to be an employee of any school board. So say you work for a school board in and around the Kingston area, but you wish to run for the school board in the Kawartha Lakes area, you are not able to do so. If you wish to run for a trustee position in any school board in the province, you must take an unpaid leave of absence before you file your nomination form. If elected, you must resign from your job, and you cannot work for a school board and be a trustee anywhere in Ontario at the same time. Additionally, those who are not eligible to run for school trustee are those who are clerks, deputy clerks, treasurers, or deputy treasurers within a municipality within the jurisdiction of the board, any person not eligible to vote in the municipality, and an employee of a school board, as I said, unless you take an unpaid leave of absence and resign if elected. Also, for both elected office for council and for school board trustee, the following people are ineligible for running for both. That's a judge of any court, a member of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, a senator, a member of the House of Commons, or an inmate of penal or correctional institution under sentence of imprisonment. Moving on to third-party advertisers. So just to start, a third-party advertiser is an individual, corporation, or trade union that's registered in the municipality to promote, support, or oppose either a candidate or a yes/no question on the ballot. So as mentioned, only an individual, a corporation, or a trade union are eligible to file a notice of registration as a third-party advertiser. Moving on to nomination day and the nomination process. Nominations opened at the beginning of May, specifically May 1st or the 2nd if you were not doing electronic filing, because this year May 1st happened to be a Sunday. So the last day for filing nominations is August 19th, 2022 at 2:00 p.m. So if you're interested in running for either school board trustee or council or head of council, you must file your nomination sometime before August 19th at 2 p.m. The nomination filing fee for candidates is refunded once the candidate submits a completed financial disclosure of all financial transactions made up to the date that nomination was withdrawn or post-election. So moving on to withdrawal of a nomination. So say you put your name forward to run for election and then decide afterwards to withdraw that nomination. So it is recommended that a candidate personally attend the clerk's office to withdraw a nomination. Local election policies may state that a candidate must personally attend the clerk's office to withdraw candidacy. If the candidate withdraws a nomination, they're still required to file a campaign financial statement covering all of the financial transactions made during their campaign, even if it doesn't run the full course. Additionally, if you haven't spent any money nor raised any funds, there's actually a box to select when completing that report saying that you the box is complete, the form is complete, and that you recognize that you did not spend or accrue any funds. If the nomination is withdrawn, the candidate's entitled to a refund of their nomination filing fee only after they file this financial statement by the required deadline. Additionally, the candidate's guide provides a few more examples of what happens when candidates change their mind about perhaps which office to run for or whether to run in general. So again, I'd recommend checking out that candidate's guide for more thorough information on this. Continuing on, so candidates must submit Form 1, that's the nomination paper, and submit it to the municipal clerk with the filing fee. The filing fee is $200 if you're running for the head of council and $100 for all other offices, including trustee. The clerk must be satisfied that you are eligible to run in order to certify your nomination. And the clerk can ask you to show identification, to fill out an additional form, etc., to prove that you are eligible to run for that particular office. The nomination form must also have an original signature. And if your nomination is not certified by the clerk, your name will not appear on the ballot to be elected. Just to confirm, as there's a few different questions and situations when there's a ward system in place. So as long as you are eligible to vote in the municipality, you're able to run in any ward, even if that's not the ward that you reside in or you don't own property in that ward. However, if you do run in a ward where you don't live, then you aren't able to vote for yourself, as you have to vote in the ward in which you reside. So again, continuing on with the nomination process, the nomination for an office on council must be endorsed by at least 25 individuals. So municipal council candidates are required to obtain 25 nomination signatures on Form 2. That's the endorsement of nomination form. Additionally, there is a regulation that provides an exemption to this requirement for candidates in municipalities with less than 4,000 electors, but this doesn't apply to school board candidates. Nominators can nominate more than one candidate, so an individual can sign to endorse more than one candidate running for council, but nominators must meet the eligibility requirements for a municipal elector. So you couldn't have your 12-year-old child endorse you to run for council, of course. In a ward system, the nominator doesn't have to be an individual residing in the ward. They just have to be eligible to vote in the municipality as a whole. Additionally, if the nominator does sign your form and they aren't eligible to do so, they could be held accountable under the penalty section of the Municipal Elections Act. As always, you can provide more than 25 signatures, but it's not required. There we go. So as I mentioned before, occasionally a candidate can change their mind and decide to run for a different office than the one that they had originally filed for. But you can only run for one office at a time. So you cannot run for head of council and a councillor seat at the same time. If a person does file a second nomination, the first nomination is deemed to be automatically withdrawn. If a candidate decides to run for another office and they have already completed that step of receiving the 25 endorsement signatures, they can use those previous 25 endorsement signatures for their other office. So if a candidate decides to run for both offices on the same council or school board, as I said, everything can be transferred to the second campaign. Unless the candidate decides to run for a different office on the same council or school board and one or both offices are elected by ward, the two campaigns have to be kept entirely separate and two financial statements have to be at the end. So in terms of third-party advertisers, individuals, corporations, and trade units also have to register to be third-party advertisers just as candidates would. There is no registration fee for third-party advertisers. But a third-party advertiser would register with the clerk at the local municipality as per section 88.6, section 1 of the Municipal Elections Act. So once registered, the third-party advertiser may advertise in support of or in opposition to any candidate being elected by voters in that municipality. So that includes council members, trustee, and any directly elected upper tier candidates. That's not the case here, obviously, but any person or entity may advertise regarding any issue relating to elections in that municipality without registering. But if you are a third party, so as I said previously, at that trade union, excuse me, individual or corporation, you must register. To advertise regarding questions on the ballot, that also requires registration as a third-party advertiser. So for a regular, that registration cannot be filed earlier than the first day for filing nominations, which was May 1st, and cannot be filed later than the Friday before voting day during the clerk's office hours. So a little bit of a different timeline for third-party advertisers. So the third-party advertising is geographically based and is structured around the concept of influencing a specific set of voters, obviously. So registering in the municipality where the third-party advertiser hopes to influence votes allows the flexibility to support or advocate against a question on the ballot or an individual that's running for that office. Again, this is specific to those individuals who are, oh, sorry, I just lost where I was there. So the third-party advertiser's registration is deemed to be withdrawn if the individual who filed as a third-party advertiser suddenly decides to run in the election as a candidate. So immediately their advertising campaign would end if they filed their nomination. If a corporation or a trade union is registered as the third-party advertiser, it would not be affected by a person filing a nomination, as the person would be a different entity than the trade union or the corporation. A third-party advertiser and a candidate would need to be careful to distance their activities, as third-party advertising is not permitted to take place under the direction of a candidate. The existing campaign finance rules would not change, so finances relating to a third-party advertising campaign can't be transferred to a candidate's campaign, and a third-party advertiser who withdraws and closes their campaign cannot transfer that campaign to someone else. In order to maintain financial transparency around third-party advertising campaigns, the financial statements of advertisers who end their campaign early should reflect their finances as of the day that the campaign ended. Additionally, the registration period for third-party advertisers does run until the Friday before voting day or the last day the clerk's office is open before voting day takes place. Moving on to campaign contributions. I'm going to go relatively slowly through this, as this is a more nuanced situation, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of this session regarding this, as there is a lot of information to digest. So campaign accounts are required by all candidates and third-party advertisers who intend to raise or spend money, period. For acclamations and campaigns where no funds are raised or spent, there's no need for a campaign account. But regardless, if you plan to self-fund your own campaign, all purchases, all money that comes in or out for the purpose of your campaign needs to come out of a special financial account that is dedicated to your election. It cannot come from your personal checking, your personal savings. It must come from a specifically opened account for the purpose of this election. Regardless of it is all your personal donations or if it comes from others, it all needs to come from a specific election-specific account. So
Hi, Keely, it's Joel. You can try to share your screen again.
Oh,
sorry,
perfect. No problem at all, Joel.
For the interruptions.
No problem, Joel. So, as I said, trade unions and corporations are not eligible to contribute to candidates' campaigns. Although they can participate in the election as third-party advertisers and make contributions to third-party advertising campaigns, they're not allowed to contribute to candidates' campaigns. Third-party advertisers will also generally need to follow the same rules for raising campaign funds and financial reporting as candidates who are running for office well. Additionally, municipalities must establish rules and procedures regarding the use of municipal or local board resources during the campaign period. And this encourages accountability and transparency and ensures that both those who are currently on council and those who are not are kind of on an even playing field heading into the election.
Keely, do you want to share your screen again? Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had opened it on my thing, but not shared. Yep, just one moment. You'd think we'd know by now. There we are. Hoping everyone can see that. Oops.
We can. Go ahead.
Perfect. So contributions from the candidate and their spouse as I said, are considered to have come from the same person and count against something called the self-contribution limit. The rules for determining whether corporations are considered to be one contributor are clarified in the Act, and it says that if one corporation controls the others directly or indirectly, then they're considered to be the same contributor. So candidates and third-party advertisers cannot accept contributions from the following set of parties and individuals. Additionally, the value of services provided by volunteers is generally not considered to be a contribution. However, if a professional, like an accountant or a lawyer, volunteers to provide their services for which they would normally be paid, the market value of that service must be recorded as a contribution by the volunteer and is considered a campaign expense. So, for example, having someone door knock is not something that needs to be documented as a campaign expense, but having a family friend who is a lawyer join your campaign to provide legal services is considered a donation or a campaign expense and must be recorded as a contribution at the market value. So campaign contributions generally are monies, goods, or services given to a candidate for his or her election campaign. Cash contributions are only accepted up to $25, and anything more than that must be made by check, money order, or a method that clearly shows where the funds came from. Fundraising events or functions that are held by or on behalf of a candidate for the purpose of raising money for the candidate's campaign are also considered. And for every contribution, it's encouraged that receipts are issued for every contribution, and that these receipts contain the name, address of the contributor, the amount of the donation, as well as the date for record keeping, as you do have to keep track of all of these expenses. As mentioned, there are contribution limits. So the limit on contributions to any one candidate or registered third-party advertiser is $1,200. The individual contribution amount has increased this year from $750 to $1,200, but the aggregate amount of $5,000 by one person to any number of candidates or third-party advertisers in that same municipality stays the same at $5,000. So since candidates and third-party advertisers are required to inform their contributors of contribution limits, you may want to include the limits on the receipts that you provide to these contributors if you know that they might be getting close to one of these limits. Going back a little bit to self-funding limits, as we discussed, the self-funding limit for municipal council candidates based on the number of electors voting for that office to a maximum of $25,000 per candidate. So you can see the calculations here on the screen. So for the head of council, it's a base total of $7,500 plus $20 per elector, while for other offices, it is a base amount of $5,000 plus 20 cents per elector. These contributions all have to be deposited into the campaign account, a receipt provided, and the contributions reported on the financial statement. And as I mentioned, those calculations both have a maximum of $25,000. So even if either of these calculations worked out to over $25,000, it would still be $25,000. So in terms of borrowing, candidates can open their campaign account with their own funds. The candidate cannot loan funds to their campaign to kind of kickstart it with the intention of getting it all back. The only way that a candidate can reclaim this startup amount is after an election campaign period ends and prior to filing the financial statement, the candidate or his or her spouse may be refunded any contributions from the surplus. You cannot receive a loan from family members or from any corporate accounts that you may have access to. The loan isn't considered to be a campaign income, and paying it back is not a campaign expense. But if you or your spouse guarantee the loan and the campaign does not repay all of it, the remaining balance is considered to be a contribution, since the guarantor is basically providing the campaign the means to repay that loan. Additionally, loans can only be borrowed from a bank or other recognized lending institution in Ontario and must be directly deposited into the campaign account. So in terms of campaign expenses, as stipulated in the Municipal Elections Act, expenses are considered the following. So costs incurred for goods or services by or under the direction of a candidate wholly or partly for use in their election campaign are expenses. And for third-party advertisers, it's essentially the same, but for use wholly or partly in relation to third-party advertisements that appear during a campaign. So, for example, the replacement value of goods retained by the person, individual, corporation, or trade union from any previous election in the municipality and used in the current election does need to be accounted for. So say you ran in a previous election, you have some leftover signs that you created and paid for during the previous election campaign. You still have to consider what the value of that good would be today. You have to make those calculations and count it as an expense this campaign, even though you're not actually going out and physically repurchasing them. Additionally, other things that are considered expenses include audit and accounting fees, interest on loans, the cost of holding fundraising functions, the cost of holding parties and other expressions of appreciation after the close of voting, and expenses relating to a recount or a proceeding under Section 83. Again, there's more information on this in the Candidates Guide and in the Municipal Elections Act, of course. Additionally, candidates and third-party advertisers should really familiarize themselves with campaign expense provisions, as they are nuanced. But campaign expenses, as I said, are those costs incurred by the candidate or on the candidate's behalf during his or her campaign, or by a third-party advertiser during that campaign. The nomination filing fee is no longer an expense and is not included on the financial disclosure forms. Goods and services donated to a campaign are in fact expenses and must be reported, and a receipt provided for fair market value is required. It's also important to remember that payment of any campaign expense must be drawn from the campaign account and a receipt provided for the details. All expenses must be reported in the relevant financial disclosure form to be filed with the clerk by the candidate or the third-party advertiser after their campaign has closed. And so as I mentioned, if you ran in the last election and you want to use your leftover goods, signs, supplies, things like that, you do have to determine the current market value for those goods and what it would cost you if you were to repurchase those things today, and consider them an expense. So the spending limit formula for candidates, the maximum amount for parties after voting day, are set out in Ontario Regulation 101-97. And the clerk actually calculates the spending limits twice. So upon a candidate filing the nomination form, the clerk should calculate the spending limit based on the number of electors on the voters list as it existed before the previous election in 2018. So as it existed September 15th, 2018. The second calculation is based on the number of electors on the voting list as it exists September 15th of this year. And this calculation is to be provided to candidates on or before September 25th of this year. Whichever number, whether that be the 2018 calculation or the 2022 calculation, whichever is higher is the final calculation, and that is the spending limit. As I mentioned, the formulas are all green here, but again, it's that base $7,500 for the head of council, and the base $5,000 for all of their offices, plus 85 cents per elector for the spending limit. Again, clerks will continue to provide estimates of the spending limits. The dates have been slightly amended since the 2018 election, but they should be providing you updates as we go along. And again, that final calculation should be provided by September 25th of this year. Candidates are also required to inform their contributors of contribution limits, as I said, and the spending limit, the campaign finance rules are the same for, as I said, both third-party advertisers and those who are running for an elected official seat. So this slide speaks to expenses that are not subject to spending limits. So the general rule is that most expenses are subject to spending limits. The ones that are not are listed in this slide. So expenses related to fundraising functions are exempt from the campaign spending limit, but in order to qualify as a fundraising function, an event must have the raising of money as its primary purpose. As well, campaign events at which incidental fundraising takes place don't qualify as fundraising functions. Similarly, a brochure promoting awareness of a candidate that contains contact information to make campaign contributions does not qualify as fundraising function, and expenses that were subject to the spending limit if incurred before voting day are not subject to the spending limit if incurred after voting day. So again, third-party advertisers are subject to two spending limits. So a general spending limit and then a separate limit for expenses related to parties and expression of appreciation as the same. And then the calculation for third-party advertisers is also a little bit different. So it's a base of $5,000 plus 5 cents per elector to a maximum of $25,000. Moving on to campaign finance rules. So as a candidate or third-party advertiser, it's really important that you be fully aware of the responsibilities regarding election spending and accepting campaign contributions. So I really suggest that you review sections 88.8 through 88.21 of the Municipal Elections Act, and also the financial statements that you'll be required to file afterwards. This will kind of help you get a sense of what you should be tracking during your campaign, and will help you organize your records, ensure that you're keeping all the necessary documentation, so you're not accidentally throwing things out, missing something, or there's an oversight, and when you reach the end of your campaign, you realize that you haven't been keeping appropriate records. So as I said, you're required under the Municipal Elections Act to keep accurate records and open a campaign bank account if you're spending or accepting any contributions. Candidates and third-party advertisers are required to keep complete and accurate financial statements during the entirety of their campaigns. All contributions and expenses are to be accounted for and disclosed by the candidate on the prescribed forms. And all candidates and third-party advertisers are required to keep all campaign financial records until after November 15th, 2026, when a new council takes office. And these rules apply whether you are elected this fall or not. So some best practices for both candidates and third-party advertisers, including storing receipts in a secure place, as they're really important documents for filing your campaign financial disclosures later on. Having your receipt signed by the candidate or a designate. Having a receipt that's multi-part, so one for the contributor and one for the candidate's records. Sequentially numbering your receipts. Opening a bank account, asking for monthly statements and canceled checks, producing duplicate deposit slips for every deposit, listing the name of the contributor and the amount, maintaining a petty cash fund to handle minor expenses and obtain invoices to support all payments from the fund. And also, candidates and third-party advertisers may find it useful to look over Form 4 and Form 8 respectively at their beginning of their campaign, just so you have a better idea of what you're looking for in terms of maintaining your records throughout. For the period for third-party advertisers, as shown on the slide, is the period when the rules for third-party advertisers applies. So that's from May 1st, 2022 until the close of voting on October 24th. So third-party advertisers and candidates are required to identify themselves on signs and advertisements, just as a heads up. And essentially, this is really important as sometimes we get questions regarding third-party advertising outside of this timeline. But outside of this period, anyone can do third-party advertising and the rules don't apply because if you keep in mind that third-party advertising under the Municipal Elections Act means to support or oppose a candidate, and there are strictly no candidates outside of the campaign period, if that makes sense. So again, the broadcaster or publisher of third-party advertisers also have to maintain records just the same as candidates do, and they have to keep everything for the period of 4 years. And they do also have to permit the public to inspect their records during normal business hours. So section 88.25 of the Municipal Elections Act states that all candidates are required to file Form 4 with the clerk, and regardless of how much or little they spent or fundraised. So if you filed a nomination form, you must file a Form 4 regardless. Additionally, the appointment of an auditor by a candidate is mandatory expenses or contributions to that campaign exceeded $10,000, and the auditor must be licensed under the Public Accounting Act. The names of contributors who contribute more than $100 must also be reported on the financial statement, and the clerk is required to make these financial statements available to the public in an electronic format free of charge once they're received and reviewed. So candidates can close their campaigns and file their financial statements after voting day until January 3rd, 2023. This is a little bit extended from last year or last election, as it was December 31st, but this year December 31st falls on a Saturday, so it's extended till January 3rd. Additionally, third-party advertisers can close their campaign and file their financial statement after early withdrawal or anytime after voting day until January 3rd, 2023. Clerks are required to make public by April 30th, 2023, a report setting out all candidates and third-party advertisers and indicating whether each candidate and third-party advertiser has complied with the filing requirements. And clerks get to determine the conditions and limits regarding electronic or in-person filing of financial statements. The nomination fee, as I said in the very beginning, is only refundable if these financial statements are filed on time. A candidate or third-party advertiser who misses the filing deadline may file within a 30-day grace period, providing a $500 late filing fee is paid to the municipality. In terms of a surplus at the end of a campaign, when filing your financial statement, a candidate or third-party advertiser with a campaign surplus must pay the entire amount to the clerk. Prior to paying over any surplus funds to the clerk, a candidate or a third-party advertiser is entitled to a refund of any contributions they or their spouse made to the campaign, but not to anyone else. The amount that may be refunded is the lesser amount of the relevant contribution or the amount of the surplus. The clerk's are required to place the surplus monies in trust for use by the candidate if they are to need it for a compliance audit down the road. If neither the candidate nor the third-party advertiser requires these funds for the purposes, then it becomes the property of the municipality. Speaking of compliance audits, so every council and school board have to establish a compliance audit committee. Members of a compliance audit committee cannot be members of council or a school board, an employee, a candidate in the election, or a registered third-party advertiser. The clerk reviews contributions and prepares a report for consideration by the Compliance Audit Committee if a contributor appears to have exceeded any contribution limits. This process is related to reviewing contributions as reported on the financial statements and isn't connected to the compliance audit process. Electors entitled to vote in an election may apply for a compliance audit even if the candidate has not filed a financial statement. The applications must be in writing and set out the electors' reasons for why they believe the Municipal Elections Act has been contravened. The application must be submitted to the municipal clerk within 90 days of the filing deadline, and the Compliance Audit Committee will consider the application and decide whether to retain an auditor to undertake a compliance audit of the candidate's financial return or to not. The Compliance Audit Committee is required to provide a brief written reason for its decision either way. Additionally, the Compliance Audit Committee meetings are to be open to the public, but the committee may deliberate on issues in private. Additionally, the Compliance Audit Committee considers the auditor's report if it is deemed that an auditor should investigate this, and then they consider the auditor's report. If the compliance audit determines that there has been an apparent contravention of the Municipal Elections Act, the committee will decide whether to proceed with legal action. The decisions of the committee may be appealed to the Superior Court of Justice, and a person who believes that a candidate has contravened the Municipal Elections Act may proceed with legal action on their own without having first obtained a compliance audit. Offenses are described in section 90, subsection 3, and it's an offense to directly or indirectly offer or promise to give any valuable consideration connected to the exercise or non-exercise of an elector's vote, offer a person money or other valuables in order to convince them to run for office or refrain from running for office, give, procure, or promise to procure an office or employment to induce a voter to vote or not vote, or a candidate to run or not run for office. Additionally, the following penalties are available to the courts upon conviction of an offense under the Municipal Elections Act. Onto the voters list. So the preliminary list of electors as corrected by the clerk becomes the voters list on September 1st, 2022. The clerk determines how and when individuals can apply to have their name and information corrected or to be added or removed from the voters list. The clerk can also remove a name from the list if the clerk becomes aware that the person has passed away. Additionally, candidates running in a ward are entitled to only that portion of the list that contains the names of electors entitled to vote in that ward. If asked on written request, the clerk shall provide a copy of the voters list to specific individuals, including an upper tier clerk, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and candidates. Additionally, the clerk may require anyone who receives a copy of the list to sign a receipt acknowledging that the list is to be used for election purposes only, and all other uses would be in violation of the Municipal Elections Act. So I believe that I saw in the chat, Joel, that there are no voting proxies in your election.
That's correct, yep.
Perfect. So I will skip from this slide to save some time. Moving on to scrutineers. So only candidate may appoint a scrutineer to represent them during the voting and counting of votes, including during third-party advertisers are not allowed to appoint scrutineers. Scrutineers should respect that the deputy returning officer must ensure fairness, access, privacy, and security of the vote. And it's important to remember that the deputy returning officer is in charge of the activity in the voting place, and the deputy returning officer may ask the scrutineer to leave if the scrutineer is not complying with appropriate legislation. In the event of a tie, a recount is automatic. So in addition, councils and school boards may establish policies prior to the election, setting out additional conditions for an automatic recount. For example, a certain number of votes difference triggers an automatic recount. But in all instances, the recount must happen within 15 days of the clerk receiving a court order or council passing a resolution to conduct a recount. And a recount must be held in the same manner manner as the original count. Finishing up, these are a few key dates related to the election this fall. Obviously, we've passed May 1st being the opening of nominations. Our next key date is nomination day, which is the end of the period by which you can file your nomination to run for an office. And then, as you can see on the screen, there are continued deadlines until kind of early to mid 2023 related to the election. On this slide, I provided a list of resources. In terms of the legislation links, they'll all take you to the eLaws website where you can review provincial legislation online and familiarize yourself with the sections that I mentioned during this presentation. Additionally, there's a link to our ministry's resources for the election. So that includes what about the candidates guide, the voters guide, and the third-party advertisers guide. The Municipal World website will take you to a bookshop link where you can look at or purchase books related to running for municipal office. And again, just a separate link to the Municipal Councilors guide as well. So I'm going to leave this up on the screen just for a second while I wrap up. If any of you had a more specific question or something that you're not, you don't want to ask in front of the group, feel free to give me an email with your question. I'm always happy to respond to questions and about anything regarding the election. In some cases, as I said at the beginning, I am not a lawyer, so in some cases I do need to take those back to my office and my colleagues in our legal services branch to kind of confirm. But again, if you are willing to ask your question, I'm happy to take them at the end of the session today. So thanks everyone for your time. I know that was a lot of information, but again, please feel free to follow up with me if I can clarify anything or provide any additional information.
So thank you, Kaylee. That was a lot of information in a short, very short time period, but she will be around at the end for any specific questions that you may have. The city, as I said, will give a presentation now that will be more specific to Kawartha Lakes. It'll go over the staff resources, the tools and resources, voters list, internet telephone voting, key policies, bylaws, and legislation, and the election website. So I'll turn the presentation over to Sarah, who is the Deputy Clerk, Deputy Returning Officer.
Good afternoon, everyone. So today we wanted to take an opportunity to highlight some of the tools and resources for this election. So the first one would be MPAC's voterlookup.ca. So voterlookup.ca is a tool that's offered through MPAC that allows residents to check the voters list to see if they are on the voters list, and if not, to provide their information to MPAC to have their name added. In addition to that, we have online election services offered by our VoterView, which is also known as DataFix. Those online election services would include online voter registration. Voting for this election will be completed using internet and telephone, and that service will be offered by Untitled Canada Inc. As part of that, third-party testing will be completed using a municipal user group, which will be led by Markham. Notices or pin letters will be mailed to electors through Canada Post via DocuLink. And of course, the city's website is a resource that's continually updated to include information, schedules, and how-to videos. Carrying on from there, we will be holding information sessions. One example is the information session you're attending here today with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. In addition to that, we will be hosting voter information sessions, and those sessions will be held on August 29th here at City Hall and Council Chambers, and it will include electronic participation via Zoom and in-person attendance. We will also host an information session on August 31st at the Cobacont Community Center from 1 to 3 p.m. And then again on September 14th at the Omimi Coronation Hall from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And both of those sessions will be in person. Residents will be given the opportunity to register to attend either of those sessions, either by sending an email to election@kawarthalakes.ca or by contacting our elections office at 705-324-9411, and of course 1-888 is the direct extension to that office. All of those sessions will be advertised prior to. There will also be pop-up locations. We are looking at future community events so that we can have presence at those events to promote voter engagement. The voting period will run from 9 a.m. on October 14th until 8 p.m. on October 24th. In preparation for that, voting help centers rather, not traditional polling stations, will be located at City Hall and designated customer service centers. Voting kiosks and revisions to the voters list will be available at these locations, and they will be open for regular office hours and until 8 p.m. on voting day. In addition to that, City Hall will be open on Saturday, October 15th and on Saturday, October 22nd from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. To make the office hours available to anyone who's not available during the work week. Additional voting kiosks will also be located at libraries, being the Bethany, Fenland Falls, Kinmount, Kirkfield, Lindsay, Seabright, and Woodville branches. And those additional voting kiosks will be open during regular library hours. And it's important to note that the libraries are not open until 8 p.m. on voting day. Election information, of course, will also be available at the voting help centers, which do include free Wi-Fi for any residents who may not have Wi-Fi at their home.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll move on to Deborah, who is the election supervisor, and she'll talk about a little bit about the voters list.
Hi. As you can tell from what was already shared with us from Keely, the voters list is quite an in-depth process. So the first thing that happens is that voters are welcome to go to voter lookup, which, as we mentioned, is handled through MPAC, and they confirm or update their electoral information. That means they can add or change their names or address. They can also change school support from the 4 different options, which are English public, French public, English separate, and French separate. This information is needed to create a preliminary list of electors. At the same time, we're also collecting information to clean up that list. So we're going through and taking out records that we know are no longer existing, or if we have duplicates that just have wrong addresses and things like that. So as of September the 1st, MPAC will give us a preliminary list of electors. We actually get that a little bit earlier, but when it becomes available to the public is September the 1st. And then at that time, people will be able to begin making those updates and other things directly onto their onto the city website. There'll be links on the election pages for people to know how to do that, as well as it being advertised and shared with the public in general. Available online, the printer's list is available online as well. There'll be printed copies at city halls and the designated customer service centers and libraries. That means if you want to come in and look at a physical list and say, am I on the list? You can, the clerk or help person will move it to your name and say, yes, is this you? So that you can confirm that the correct information is on there. So even if you don't have access to any sort of computer or phone to check the list, you can still do it in person at those places. Then our list is taken So at that time, we begin updating the list on voter view. And again, that's where people can continue to do the changes to their information through voter view. And that's also where the candidates who have chosen to have electronic access to the list will be able to do so through the candidates portal, which will allow you access to the list for the ward that you're running from. One of the things to really remember about the duties of electors, they have to register themselves. It's like any other time when you go to vote, you have to bring your own ID and say, this is me, this is not me. So you can't collect lists and bring them into us. We really need each voter to come in person and see someone at a library service center here at City Hall, or else to upload their ID, which they'll be prompted to do so if they're trying to add themselves to the list through the computer. So back to how are we approaching this? Same as last time, 10 days, 2 ways. So that means that the voting period from October the 14th at 9 a.m. to October the 21st until 8 p.m., you're allowed to use that PIN number that you've received in the mail in order to vote. That means you can vote the day that, October 14th, right at 9 o'clock if you want to, and then it's off your mind for the rest of the period. As well, you can use computers because it's internet or phone, but you can use computers at those places that we've talked about, such as customer service desks and City Hall or the libraries that are participating. So the computer, cell and landline touchtone phones, those are what you use. So if you have still a rotary phone or something like that, it's not going to work, but you can still use your computer or go to a library or here to City Hall in order to vote. And that is being provided through Cyto Canada Inc., as we mentioned earlier. And then we have access to the kiosks, which are here at City Hall, the libraries and those service centers that we've mentioned. And those will be using iPad touchscreens. And also public information sessions that we've talked about. Some of those community events we're hoping to have hotspots at, so we can say, hey, are you on the voters list? Let's check right now. So that's one of the reasons why we want to be out in the community.
Thank you, Deborah. Now we're going to pass it over to Joel Watts. He is the Deputy Clerk and Deputy Returning Officer for the election. He'll go over the key policies, bylaws, legislation, and the election website.
Okay, so I got the fun stuff. Just so that you're aware, there's a lot of legislation that you will need to review and documents that you will be required to follow during the municipal election campaign. The biggie here is the Municipal Elections Act. The Municipal Elections Act is the foundational document for how the municipality must conduct a municipal election. And so that is the foundational document that answers, generally speaking, the large majority of our questions. This is the same act that is applicable to every municipality in the province of Ontario. So not just Kawartha Lakes, but it applies to every municipality across Ontario. So if you see references to certain sections where we say section 88.34, like Keely was mentioning today, that's usually a reference to the Municipal Elections Act. The next document that we'd want you to be aware of is the use of corporate resources policy. There are a couple. There's the large one is for the city of Kawartha Lakes, but all of the school boards will also have a use of corporate resources policy as well. And that policy outlines what are the appropriate uses for city resources. And that can be obviously dollars. Obviously, the city can't be funding any specific campaigns, but also facilities. And so there is rules about using facilities and also rules about how staff may or may not get involved. So the use of corporate resources policy, it very clearly outlines the appropriate uses that staff and city resources can get involved with the municipal election. The election recount policy is also provided, has been adopted by City Council in the event of a close vote. The Municipal Elections Act requires a recount in the event of a tie, but the election recount policy also outlines a close vote, where if a certain criteria has been met, a recount could be held if at the election night that close vote criteria is qualified. And it also requires action basically by the second place candidate would need to take action if they wanted to. However, if they were satisfied with the results, then no action would be required. But the election recount policy is what's been adopted by City Council, and we would be obliged to follow in the event of a close vote. The use of the voters list policy, as Keely outlined, is one of our policies where we outline what are the appropriate uses of the voters list. So obviously you cannot use the voters list for commercial purposes. It can only be used for electoral purposes. And so when a candidate receives a copy of the voters list, they can only use it for election purposes, and they can't be making photocopies to sell to some other business professional that would really like that type of data. So it's only used for election purposes, and all candidates do sign off on agreeing to that policy upon nomination. Now, there's a couple biggies here that are quite attractive and do get a lot of attention throughout a municipal election campaign. First off is the Ministry of Transportation regulations for election sign placement on provincial highways. The provincial highways in the city of Kawartha Lakes are Highway 7, 35, 7A, and 115. All of those are provincial highways, and they follow different rules. They're owned by the province. The province is quite particular about placement of signs along provincial highways. We found in the last municipal election, most municipal election signs that were placed were found to be in violation of their rules. And so they are quite particular, and they will remove them to their depot. Now, when it comes to city roads, that's where we'd be following our own election sign bylaw. And that's the last bullet point here. And we've got some more details on that. So the election sign bylaw outlines the placement of election signs anywhere in Kawartha Lakes. And there are two key dates that we really need to follow here for the municipal election. So the one that most everyone is interested in is for the placement of election signs along roadways and other public property. And that is between August 25th and October 29th. That is a period that election signs may be placed along the roadways or other public property within the allowances of the Municipal Elections Act. Obviously, you can't place it anywhere on the roadway. You need to follow the provisions of the bylaw, but that is the time period there. Now, this date is a little further towards, it's a little closer, it shortens the period that election signs are permitted on public property. So to compensate for that, there is a new provision to permit election signs on private property between the date of a candidate's nomination until October 29th. And you may or may not have already seen signs placed on private property by registered candidates, and that is permitted under the bylaw so long as the signs follow the regulations for private property. There are rules, obviously, that would need to apply for private property. And the type of things that you really should pay attention to is that the election sign bylaw regulates the placement of signs on private property, does speak to the difference between residential, commercial, industrial private property, but it also speaks to things like the placement of signs on the roadway and other municipally owned property, and curb separated medians. This was in the provincial and federal elections. This is a new election sign bylaw. This is the first time it's been used in this for a municipal election, but both the province and the federal elections have had a chance to experience what it's like to use this, especially if you are in Lindsay. There are very specific rules for the placement on curb separated medians, such as Victoria Avenue. And so there are very clear rules that are outlined in that regard, but that would also qualify for any roundabouts. Placing a sign in a roundabout would also qualify in that. There's only a couple other curb separated medians outside of Victoria Avenue. But it also talks about the allowable size for election signs, placement and proximity in relation to other election signs. So you can't place your sign too close to other election signs. Also, removal of signs for non-compliance during the election or following an election day. And then those penalties that could be applied for failing to remove signs. And these are basically fairly similar rules that were applicable in the last municipal election. One thing key to note, there is a new provision that only permits election signs to be placed within the jurisdiction of the campaign. So that is being run. So obviously a candidate for mayor can only place their signs within Kawartha Lakes. They cannot place their signs in Trent Lakes or Brock Township. But candidates for school board and ward councillor can only place it within the school board area or the ward that they are running in. So when it comes to that very popular area of Victoria Avenue and Lindsay, only candidates for council in Lindsay and mayor, and then the school board trustees that may be running will be permitted to place their signs in that area. And once again, there are restrictions to the number of signs for each median and the number of signs per candidate being only one on those curb separated medians. Now, third-party advertisers, Keely did specify that there is another option that is available for participation in the election. And Ontario residents, corporations, and trade unions making expenses for advertisements related to the promotion, support of, or opposition to a candidate in any broadcast, print or electronic, must register. So if there is any expense that is happening by any one of those groups, if for an advertisement, they must register. If you see an advertisement that is for you or against you and you are unaware of that, and they have not registered under the page of registered candidates and third-party advertisers, they may be in violation of the Municipal Elections Act, and we may have to conduct an investigation. And all third-party advertisements must contain the following information, including the name of the third party, the municipality were registered, obviously Kawartha Lakes, and the contact information for which the third-party advertiser may be contacted. And the deadline for third-party advertisers to register, to be able to advertise, is Friday, October 21st. At 4:30 p.m. And third-party advertisers must also file a financial statement. And so we will definitely be keeping an eye on that. There were only 2 third-party advertisers registered in the 2018 municipal election, but obviously every election is different, and the option is available to any resident, Ontario resident, corporation, or trade union. The election website is really going to be your source for information. The election office is covered by Deborah, who can answer the emails and telephone calls, but in the event that we're not here, the election website is really your best resource at kawarthalakes.ca/election. And it's got current information, schedules, and messaging for candidates. There's a large button there in the middle where you can see information for candidates. And it also includes some tools for inclusion and corrections to the voters list and access for online voting during the voting period. We'll try to make sure that there's an easy link for folks to access the link that they need to enter their PIN number. So become familiar with the website. Take a look over it, look over the resources. It's not just our resources, provincial resources, other school board resources are also there, and the most up-to-date election information. That's also where you can book an appointment to register to file your nomination. If you are already nominated, you can also book an appointment to change your forms, where you can change the office that you're running for, or to submit new forms. And that way we can make sure that we'll have someone available for you during that time. And we have a couple different options available to you if you're looking for answers outside of the session today. And you will want to check the manual and the candidates guide, the provincial candidates guide in our website. And we've got that picture up on the screen for you to be reminded of those three options. And the manual is given to everyone who is registered as a candidate. And then that provincial guide is a really excellent resource. Keely's group at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs did a really excellent job, especially where it pertains to those issues that are dealt with across all elections on Ontario. And we really like to reference their guide when it comes to things like financial reporting for all of those rules that you are required as a candidate to follow. And so you'll definitely want to look at that blue candidates guide, and you'll get a copy upon registration, but it's also available on our website. Now, if you have questions about the election campaign in general, we want all candidates to forward those questions in writing to election@kawarthalakes.ca. That allows us to respond to those questions in writing, but it also allows us to keep track of those questions where we can post those on the city's website. We're posting all general election candidate questions that are applicable to all candidates, that would be helpful to all candidates, at kawarthalakes.ca/candidates. And so therefore you can access all of the questions that have been asked thus far. There's quite a few already. And then you can see if your question has already been asked. Potentially it has been, but if not, send an email to election@kawarthalakes.ca. Now, obviously too, for those running for office for the city of Kawartha Lakes, you may have questions that are more general about the corporation, being questions about the municipality. And we had in 2018 a lot of very good questions that were supplied by candidates of general information that we could supply to all candidates. And that's also on the website right now, a list of all of those corporate questions. They ask things like how many staff members are on the sunshine list, or how many fire stations are there, or how many employees does the city have. We want you to ask those questions to our Director of Corporate Services, which is Jennifer Stover. She was on the Zoom line at one point, and there she is. Hi, Jennifer. Jennifer's also signed on as our auditor, our internal auditor for campaign processes. She's not part of the clerk's office. She is a separate department from the clerk's office, but she's also agreed to take those corporate questions and respond to candidates with an answer, and then she will compile those responses and they will be updated on the website. We have none so far, but as those questions come in throughout the campaign, we'll compile them and place them on the website. And that would be our information so far. So now we get to in-person questions. For those of you who are on Zoom, and for those in the room, we obviously want to apologize for the disruption in the meeting. And we've just also been informed that a third disruption will occur when many of our laptops are going to get a security update at 5:45. So we will try our best to keep the Zoom running, but we're going to turn it now over to in-person questions. And I believe Kathy and the rest of us are going to do our best to answer.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Deborah. So what we'll do is, because we use, that's right. Because we're using Zoom, in order for the people that are participating by Zoom to hear us, we have to be using a microphone. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, one person at a time, go to the podium, and there's a button, and your red light will come on and you can ask your question. So those people that are participating by Zoom can hear. Thank you.
And for those on Zoom as well, if you just want to turn on your video to indicate that you would like to ask a question, that will give us an indication that you would like to speak, but we're going to take a couple from the podium in council chambers first.
Thank you to Keely. I just wondered if your that very concise presentation that you gave today, if I missed a few things, and I just wonder if you're going to have that for us that we can pick up online. And then I ask it, I can probably pick up a couple there. I think it was on slide 30. It was talking about contributions, campaign contributions. I'm not sure if it was 30, it was around there somewhere. And you differentiated between what was a contribution and something else that was concerning that if you sell something for less than $25, that it's not considered a campaign contribution. I just didn't understand that.
Sure. So thanks for that question. I'm absolutely going to make the presentation available through the city. However they'd like to do that, posting on their website, something like that. That's typically what my municipalities do with this information. So you'll be able to access it on their website. The $25 amount, that was the top amount that you can receive as a donation or contribution to your campaign in cash. So any contributions made over $25 cannot be taken in cash by the candidate. That's the difference there. But yes, I did differentiate between an expense, a contribution, things like that in the slides, and hopefully the presentations, when you can view it yourself and go through in comparing the what's on the slide, additionally in cross-referencing that with the legislation, which there's a link to also in the slide. Hopefully that will help you out there. If not, you can feel free to email me anytime.
Because I think it was just under that, but it said that it wouldn't be the money you receive by selling something less than $25 would not be considered to be an expense, or you wouldn't have to expense it. I must have been confused by that, but I'll wait to.
Let me just, I have it right here on my screen. I can just confirm that for you. So contributions over $25 may be made by check or money order, or a method that clearly shows where the funds originated. If goods sold to raise funds are sold for $25 or less, that amount is considered campaign income, not a contribution. Is that what you're speaking to?
Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, that's on slide 28.
28. Okay, thank you.
So you'll be able to see that when it's posted online.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Hello, my question's for Joel. I just want to clarify there, when you're talking about campaign signs, you said that if you're running in the city of Kawartha Lakes, in this Lindsay proper, you were talking about specifically Victoria Avenue. Now, you mean that, for example, me running in Ward 5 at Kent Street, north of Kent Street, that's the only place, like I have to go north of Kent Street. I can't put it south of Kent Street, which would be 7. And the way you said it, I know we talked about it before, and I just wanted to clarify that's what you meant by that, right?
Yeah, it's the only really section of the election sign bylaw that's quite specific and detailed as to the street itself. And Victoria Avenue, because there's not very many places in Lindsay that actually qualify for a sign to be placed on public property without it looking like it's placed directly in front of someone's house. We understand that people would want to place signs on Victoria Avenue, but we also need to mow the lawn, and there's also the farmers market. And so there are some very specific provisions to the placement. So yes, the dividing line between Ward 5 and 7 in Lindsay is Kent Street. So as a candidate for Ward 5, you can only place signs on those medians that are north of Kent Street, and you couldn't place them in the median south of Kent Street. And I believe there's only one or two south of Kent Street anyways.
Yeah, so then basically the only signs that would be on that north part would be Ward 5 and Mayoral.
Ward 5, mayor, or school board trustee,
yeah,
if there's a race for Ward 5 school board trustee.
All right, thank you.
There we go. That better? I just had one question. I wasn't sure if it was a typo. On one of the slides, it talked about the library being open for, I think, in-person voting. And I think it said the library was going to open at 8 p.m. at night. I just wasn't sure because that seemed to be the time that the polls were going to close. I was a bit confused on that. Forget which slide it was.
Yeah, so I think that slide spoke to the libraries are not all open till 8 p.m. Because of the changing nature of how COVID has allowed certain things to be open at different times. You can't vote at a library using one of those kiosks unless you unless that library is open. So the only ones that will be open until 8 p.m. are the service centers where someone can get registered to vote and they can vote in person if they would like to using a kiosk. The libraries are only open during their normal business hours and will have no extended hours. The library board is its own separate part of the city of Kawartha Lakes, so they do make their own rules. So you can't vote there unless that library is normally open until 8 p.m. on voting day. And last election, those only two libraries were Lindsay and Woodville, but we'll have to see going forward what the hours, operating hours are of the library on that day. But we're going to ensure that the designated service centers and City Hall are available to open at least until 8 p.m. by a kiosk.
Thank you.
Hello, my question is about scrutineering. What actually will the scrutineers be doing? When will they be allowed to scrutineer? And how, I see zero ways that they will have any way of ensuring that there's any integrity to this election. I mean, clearly you can't even keep security online in this room. How are you going to do it all across the city? It baffles the mind in my question. So I'd like to see why we're doing this. Do we not have enough people in the city of Kawartha Lakes that can count to 1,000 anymore?
Thank you for your question. Unfortunately, today's event was because I allowed someone to come into the meeting that I thought wanted to participate in an adult fashion and a respectful fashion. Obviously, that person that was led into the meeting had ulterior motives. So that's not that person hacked our system. I actually allowed him into the meeting. Secondly, this is the second for internet telephone voting. This has been approved by council in 2018 and now in 2022. We do have a new vendor. We did have some issues during the last election. That was based on connectivity and their third-party contract that they had. We have a different company this time. We also will be partnering with the City of Markham and other municipalities that are using Cital Canada Inc. for their electronic telephone voting. And it'll be a third-party company that will test the system, will try to infiltrate the system, try to hack the system, do everything in their power to see if there's any weaknesses in the system to ensure that there's complete integrity of the voting in October. Did I answer all your questions?
No, my question is, what do the scrutineers do? How
Oh,
can
sorry.
they do
Sorry.
anything to
Okay.
be sure that there's any integrity in this system at all? Because it's over 10 days now. I'm just curious how you're going to, how scrutineers are actually going to do anything.
So scrutineers have been part of the municipal elections for eons. And it's been always based on a traditional paper ballot polling places where a scrutineer can go in and oversee, that the electors are getting their ballots, that they're on the voters list, that they are handing their ballot in. They can oversee that.
Well, in theory, that the ballot box is empty and that the count is accurate as well.
Exactly. So for the electronic system, we'll have our opening on October 14th, where we'll have the candidates, their scrutineers, to ensure that there's zero, it's the same as looking in a ballot box, that the system has zero count, that no one has submitted any kind of votes, that we're starting from zero. So it's the same as an empty ballot box. On voting day, when votes close, scrutineers and candidates will be permitted to see the results come in. And basically that's a system that will, will close all the kiosks. They'll notify us that all their voters have voted that are in those facilities, and we'll close down the system. And then the results will be provided. There's really not a lot, except the beginning and the end. There's really not a function for scrutineers based on the traditional purpose under the Municipal Elections Act.
So they're being wiped out. There's no way that people can actually watch that there's any integrity. I was involved in the provincial election, and I mean, one of the Dominion machines actually came up 100% for Laurie Scott and 0 for everyone else. And then some computer guy went and adjusted it a bit and came out with a different number. So it was interesting. And yeah, the scrutineers were supposed to see that the boxes were sealed and they weren't. So obviously scrutineers have been virtually eliminated, and there is no integrity in the system. That'll affect whether we decide to run or not. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is, I have bought business cards to hand out. I have not been able to open up my bank account yet, and I've paid for them with my credit card. How do I keep track of if I'm self-funding my campaign? How do I go about?
I'll let Keely answer that question.
Sorry, I just didn't catch the last little bit of your question there, and that you purchased business cards already for your campaign, but yeah, I just didn't catch after. How do I go about?
I haven't got my bank account opened yet, okay. So I paid for it with my credit card. How do I keep track of that, or just keep the receipt and handle it like that?
So the best way for you to have gone about this was to wait for any campaign related expenses until you open that bank account, because according to the legislation, anything that you purchase for your campaign is to come directly from that account. Essentially now you would want to treat it as if you had bought them to run previously and count them as their market value if you were to buy them now, and take that from your campaign account and count it as an expense. In the future, best practice is to hold on any purchases, any expenditures, anything like that, until you can be sure that those funds are coming directly from your account, because now you're going to have to note that on your financial statements later on that you made this purchase, from a not election related account, which will create some issues in your reporting. It's really important that anything that comes and goes in terms of finance related to your election comes in and out of that account for transparency purposes, so that there is that ability to look at your account, your statements, your financial statements that come from the bank, see how much is coming in and coming out. So again, this is the same way as you would treat if you had ran in the 2018 election and you were going to reuse these signs that you had. You have to treat that now as an expense and count it at the market value if you were to buy them now.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Hi, just referring to the scrutineers. Scrutineers are allowed at the polling stations, correct?
Yes.
If we vote at the Fenelon Arena, I can send a scrutineer to the Fenelon Arena to stroke off names that have voted.
No, so the scrutineers are usually at traditional polling places. We do not have traditional polling places. We have different facilities, whether it's a service center or a library, that provides the technology, the kiosk. So there's really nothing to view. They can't watch someone vote, right? There has
But
to
when
be
when I went to vote provincially, the lady had a book. She asked me my name and she stroked off my name. If I was a scrutineer, I would be standing out of the way, not bothering anyone and watching for names being stroked off to stroke off on my list, no?
So there is no list.
She
So
had a list.
that's a traditional polling with a ballot, with a paper ballot.
We have no paper ballot is
No
what you're
paper
saying.
ballots. This is logging on with a secure PIN number that you receive in the mail.
Okay,
And you go to a computer, whether it's in your home, at a library, at a service center, or
Got it.
city hall. And you put in your birth date, your year, month, and date, and a secure PIN number, and then you vote. So there's nothing for the scrutineer to oversee. There's no list. However, there is a candidate's module. So the candidate can go in and look and see not how they voted, but if they voted.
that.
So that's the
point.
same as stroking off the list.
And that's the same functionality as a scrutineer standing at the desk. The candidate has access to the portal, and so they can see, it's a daily update. They can see exactly if they're electors that they're counting on their votes, if they had voted, and it's just a big yellow X and it says voted. So it's just the same.
Thank you, Joel.
And scrutineers can function. So that's a great response. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you so much.
Well, good evening. Getting there now. I guess, Keely, the first couple of questions that I would have would go to you at MMA. If a candidate or person wishing to be a candidate wants to set up their internet website, or they'd have to purchase a domain, can that be set up prior to them being registered? Simple yes or no?
No, if you're not a candidate, then there's no campaign, expenses. So
Right.
you
So
want to
they're planning on
register,
being a
you want to
can-
register as a
They're
candidate.
planning on hold on, Kelly, this is where we lose it. If the person is wanting to be a candidate or planning to be a candidate, can they purchase a domain name in advance of them actually being registered? Not using it, but at least get the name purchased so they can start setting up their website, doing their homework.
No, it is not permitted to incur a campaign expense if a campaign has not begun. You need to file your nomination. That would start your campaign. Then you can incur campaign expenses through your campaign account.
So no candidate can have a website up before they're registered, correct?
A candidate cannot incur a campaign expense if they're not already a candidate. If If they are a candidate, they are an unofficial or uncertified candidate. At this time, they filed their papers and the clerk has deemed them to be running. They are a candidate. They are running a campaign. That's a campaign expense. If they are not a candidate, there is no campaign. Therefore, they can't incur a campaign expense if they're not a candidate running a campaign.
And then let me ask a similar type of question. Literature. Candidate knows that he's going to file on any given date, wants his literature ready as soon thereafter as possible. Is it possible for the candidate to prepare his literature, take it to a printer, have the printer hold it, and hang on to that until the candidate is a registered candidate, and then pay for it in full?
I would recommend, for transparency purposes, that you file your nomination. You
I
become,
understand for transparency purposes. The question is, can they do it? Yes or no, please?
well, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't interpret the Municipal Elections Act, but the standard procedure is to file your nomination, be an uncertified candidate, open your bank account, and use funds directly from that account.
I know, but I'm looking for a legal ruling from MMA, and I thought
But
that's
I'm
what
not
you
a
were.
lawyer, so I
you give
can't
us.
speak to that. You'd have to
No,
seek
but-
a solicitor's opinion.
Okay. No, I understand that and I appreciate it. Campaign signs and literature. Does the act still require on each of those to have something noting that it's authorized by the CFO for whatever the name of the candidate is?
An individual does not need to have a CFO for their candidate, so no.
So that doesn't have to go on signs. All right, thank you. And one last thing, you mentioned two different figures and I just missed it a little bit. The amount per elector, I understand the 5,000 base on councillors, and then you said there was either 20 cent per elector, and then later I think you mentioned 85 cent per elector. Was there a difference on those two, or is
Yes, so the
that
20
sort of an
cent, the 20 cent is for your self-funding limit. So the amount that you yourself can contribute to your own campaign, that's the base of 5,000 plus 20 cents per elector, or if you're running for mayor, $7,500 plus 20 cents per elector.
Let me just hold you
Whereas-
there for first, if I can, just on that point. So if a person wants to self-finance a campaign, they can only spend $5,000 plus 20 cents per elector. But if a person does not self-finance a campaign, they can spend $5,000 plus 85 cents per elector. Something just
No,
doesn't seem quite right there.
no, that's not
We should
correct.
be encouraging people to finance their own campaigns if they can, but not at a penalty.
That's not a correct interpretation of the act. The 20 cents is the amount that you are allowed to give yourself for the campaign. If you're self-funding, you can still receive funds from other people. That's the maximum amount that you yourself can give to your own campaign. That's not limiting any other contributions to your campaign. Overall, your spending limit, regardless of whether you funded it or others and yourself have funded it, or just others have funded it, is that 5,000 plus 85 cents or 7,500 plus 85 cents.
So to hit the 85, if a person wanted to self-fund their own campaign, but have the higher limit, all they have to do is take one contribution for $25.01.
The two
now they've
limits
had
are
contributions from
exclusive
others?
of each other. I think I would really recommend that you explore Section 88 of the Municipal Act, because they're two vastly different limits and are exclusive of each other.
And Keely, I could just speak as from the city's perspective.
Mhm.
When candidates register, they are issued a certificate of maximum campaign expenditures. Those who have already registered are aware of their self-funding limit, as you described, as opposed to the limits that could be spent in total. So you are correct. If you did want to self-fund your campaign and you're not a school board trustee candidate, you, generally speaking, candidates for council can spend in the range of $6,500. It's a specific for every race. You'll need to look at the documentation for every race. And then generally speaking, the total amount that could be spent outside of self-funding is around $10,000 to $12,000 for a member of council. School board trustees don't have that. Now, we've got a couple questions on Zoom that we want to get to. Just for fairness, we would like to be able to make sure they have some time before our meeting ends.
Okay, as long as I can come back before it ends, because I did have some more
And you
questions.
can ask
Or meet-
questions
or meet
directly
with
to
you
us.
after.
That's fine. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
So Rhonda Kellington is on Zoom, and then we'll hear from Pat Warren. So Rhonda, can you ask your question, please?
You're muted.
Thanks. Yeah, you'd think we would know. Two questions about both the counselor position and the school trustee position. Are they considered full-time? And if not, what's the typical number of hours a person could expect to commit to the positions?
Thank you, Rhonda. It depends on how much effort you want to put in to either a counselor or a trustee. So a city councillor, for example, we have a committee of a whole system. So it is one council committee of the whole meeting a month, one council meeting per month. We also have special budget meetings. Also, you're expected as a councillor or a mayor to sit on several committees of council, advisory committees. So it depends on how much you want to become involved. You also have constituents that you have to answer questions or have conversations with. There's also community events. So it depends on how much effort you want, how much involvement you want to have. And I'm sorry, I can't tell you about school board trustees.
There's some great information too, Rhonda, on our website at kawarthalakes.ca/candidates that gives you some typical time commitments for members of council as opposed to mayor. It also does outline member of council remuneration. So what a member of council will expect. This current council has already adopted the rate of pay for the next member for the next term of council, and that is outlined on the same website. So as Kathy stated correctly, it is what you put into it.
Thank you. That's great.
The information on this, the information on the school board trustee, also on the election website, clearly indicates the amount of hours that can be used and what that on average can work out to as an hourly rate.
Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you, Rhonda. Pat Warren, you have a question for us.
Yeah, thank you. Not too many people use checks or money orders. So I'm wondering if when one sets up an account and you have maybe a new email, whether you could use e-transfer.
Kelly, can you answer that question for Pat?
Sure. So that's a bit of a legal question. Pat, if you want to send me an email to exactly what it looks like on the screen, my first name dot my last name at ontario.ca, I can provide you with a more fulsome kind of description of electronic fund transfer and the rules related to that.
So the city wouldn't have that information.
That's more of a legislation related question. So it's handled at the provincial level.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Pat. Is there anyone else online that has a question for the panel? Do you want to do a follow-up question? Okay. Oh,
I have two areas of concern. I was the third-party advertiser last time. Are there any limits in regards to relatives or family members that can be a third-party advertiser?
Keely?
Again, more of a legal question that I'd be happy to answer via email if you'd like to send it that way. I would hate to misspeak on this topic at this point. I do know that there are some limitations that exist, but I would not like to speak to them now, as I don't have the legislation on hand at this moment, and it would take me a couple minutes to find it. Feel free to please email me that question. I can really provide you a more fulsome answer. First name dot last name again at ontario.ca.
Okay, and I appreciate that. My second concern is following up with the scrutineers in regards to the last election and what went on. My understanding is this time that will be corrected, that scrutineers can be in the room when the numbers start coming up. Is that correct or not?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so that's a big improvement. And we thank you for that.
Yes, that was, lessons learned from 2018. What worked, what didn't work. There was nothing scrupulous. It's
No.
just something that we missed, and if it helps with the transparency and accountability, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Third question, and then I'll be done. In regards to the enumeration that a counselor receives, can they donate 50%, 60%, whatever they wish back to the municipality in way of charities? Is there any restrictions put on a counselor?
Jennifer, can you respond to that question?
Again, I'd have to look into it a little further. The city would pay the counselors and then count what the counselors wish to do with that. They could do at their own discretion.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, for allowing this to come back. On third-party advertisers, are they allowed to accept contributions from corporations? I know that candidates cannot, but third-party advertisers, can they accept it from corporations or trade unions, et cetera?
Keely, you could probably speak to this.
Sure. So a third-party advertiser is often themselves a corporation or a trade union. Typically, there are rules regarding third-party advertisers and their registration, as well as their funding and their collection and distribution of funds. Corporations and trade unions can contribute to third-party advertisers, and then municipalities and local boards are to establish rules regarding the use of municipal or local board resources. But yes, if your question is whether a trade union or a corporation are able to contribute to third-party advertising campaigns, the answer would be yes. You're correct, though, that they cannot contribute to candidates' campaigns.
All right. Now, you also mentioned, well, let me just ask one more question on that. If there's a third party, it can be in an individual's name, it can be in a group formed for it, it could be Citizens for Kawartha Lakes group, or it could be a corporation. Am I right that it could be any of those names? It does not have to be a personal name?
So the only eligible parties to become a third-party advertiser are an individual, a corporation, or a trade union. Groups or associations that are not corporations are not eligible to be third-party candidates.
So they would, if the group wanted to, they would have to do it in one or two individuals named from that group.
They would have to be an individual.
Okay. You also mentioned on the filing the necessity of an auditor's report. You said expenses or contributions which exceed 10,000. Did you mean, and I always understood it to be where expenses and contributions exceed 10,000, you have to file a report. What I heard from you was expenses or contributions. So if neither my expenses are 9,000 and my contributions are 9,000, then I don't have to file a report, an auditor's report?
I understand your question. I would have to look back on the wording in the legislation though for you.
And it doesn't certainly hurt if you are close to that $10,000 amount to get an auditor's report.
I know, but there's a specific figure, and the specific figures are there for a reason.
Yes.
Saying whether you must or you must not.
And it is good practice to get an auditor's report, because the auditor may determine that perhaps you were over $10,000. So if you're in that $9,000 range, both expenses or
So 6,000 and 6,000, Joel. I'm not trying to play with figures. I'm trying to keep either 10 or under. So if I have 8,000 in expenses and 9,000 in contributions, used to be, my understanding was you must have an auditor's report because combined they're over the 10. Here I'm hearing or, either or. If your expenses are under 10 and your contributions are under 10, then there's no necessity to file an auditor's report.
That's a question that's really specific to the legislation. So if you'd like to send me an email, I can definitely go over that with you. But again, we're getting into legal territory and I am not a lawyer.
We'll get hold of you, Keely. Maybe what we need to do is get a name and a number for the lawyer. But I appreciate your help. But my question
that would be your own solicitor under your own dollar.
But you're saying that you need a solicitor from the ministry to answer my questions.
I have a solicitor that I can ask my questions to, but you are always more than welcome to contact your own solicitor.
I asked for the ministry's solicitor. You're the one saying you're going to refer questions to the solicitor for an answer. So wouldn't we save everybody a lot of time if I could get there directly? Just a question.
You can come through me. You can email your questions through me at my first name dot last name
at Ontario. There's not much change at the MMA. Thanks.
I had 5, but I guess I can email you. I actually have 6, but quick corporate resources include city logo.
That's correct. The use of the city logo is prohibited in campaign material.
Okay. What about if somebody wanted to say, you know, we're going to have a meet and greet about the municipal election, so just best to avoid city logo?
Absolutely. Do not use the city logo. Any previous city logos, any township city logos, no use of city logos in campaign material.
Great, thank you. And with regard to registering to vote, now, if somebody lives in a community where maybe there's not going to be an event for them to come and vote and so on, and we're not supposed to help people vote, but can they use a neighbor's computer? Okay, good. So that's my 2 questions. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. People can assist someone else to access voterlookup.ca. So that's the function right now. And that is quite common. So MPAC will take that information and add it to the list.
My question is with regard to the pins. So with the municipal election, you had your card the double check was when you went in, you showed ID, so you were eligible to vote, right?
So the
Yeah, with the
provincial election,
provincial,
correct, yes.
There was a double check. You got your card, you go to vote, you show the ID, you know, you identify yourself, you know they're eligible. With the pins that are sent out, what's the double check that someone phoning in or someone using a computer is the person that got the pin when they're mailed out? Because quite frankly, in the last election, people were just throwing their cards in the recycling bin and everything. But with this, what if someone just throws it in the recycling bin or on the counter? How do you know the person voting on the phone or voting in the internet is actually the person? Like, is there a way to identify the person voting so that we know that's who voted?
Yes. So there's the double check. So we had the same complaints back in 2014 in the mail-in ballots that they were thrown, they didn't even leave the post office. They came out of their post office box and was thrown into the recycle bin. This is a little more secure as the fact that you have to be a registered voter. You receive a PIN letter. You go on to vote. You have to put in your full birth date, year, month, and day, and your specific PIN number that you're provided.
Okay.
And against the law.
Yeah.
Plus it's against the law. What's the fine?
It's an offense. This is a serious offense for someone to vote and impersonate another person. There is certainly a policy on the city's end. If someone says, it says I voted, I didn't vote. So someone used their PIN number before they got to their PIN number, say a family member used it and opened their mail and voted for them beforehand. That's a serious offense where serious fines and jail time are possible, where the police would be involved.
But how do you? There's no way of checking. How do you know?
So we could see absolutely when the time that PIN number was used.
Yeah.
And we could also see the IP address of where or the location of the user that was using it. But we can't see, unfortunately, and well, no, fortunately, we can't ever see how someone has voted. So if someone used a PIN number incorrectly or fraudulently, we will never see that, but we can see that information. So there will, of course, be evidence from the voter themselves who feels that they were defrauded. So they will have to provide evidence themselves.
Right.
But that's the same function as Kathy stated. The city of Kawartha Lakes has never had a traditional polling station model for election. Previously, mail-in voting was used, and in mail-in voting, there certainly is a chance that a family member opens up the ballot, fills it out, signs it on their behalf, and mails it in. And then they say, "Where's my ballot?" And this is a risk, but it is a serious offense that jail time and fines could be incurred.
Right. So, but if they're voting in a public voting station, there's no way to know when that happens. If you have the IP address, it's going to be yours, right?
So even in provincial and federal elections, when you're dealing with a paper ballot, somebody's making an oath. They can come in and say, I don't have my ID. I do live here. This is my address. I make an oral oath, right? So somebody can vote without ID, both provincially and federally. The issue is the onus is on the voter. So the person who does that act is the one who's responsible for the act. Our main purpose is to make sure that the system's set up in a way that maximizes accountability, such as to get on the voters list, you do have to show ID. So if you're adding yourself, you have to upload your ID. So in order for someone to have been on a list in the first place, they had to use their ID. So that's what the check is on that, in my understanding.
Thank you for your time.
We'll take questions afterwards. We just have to end the meeting right now.
I just have one final one, and it's really important.
Okay.
No, it is. The reason we're looking at seniors, senior homes. Okay, how are they going to be dealt with? Because a lot of them don't have an address. They just have it'll come so many residents. Who's going to make sure that all of them have the opportunity to vote?
So in the 2014 election, or sorry, 2018 election, we had election assistants. And we contacted approximately 14 long-term care and seniors homes that were required to look after based on the Municipal Elections Act. And we contacted the administrators of each home. We provided them the list that we had of the current residents. They were to update that based on whether the resident lived there at the home. And so we had a pretty comprehensive voters list for those homes. During that election period of the 10 days, we had election assistants go out. So they received their PIN letters, right? Because we had their current address, which was Adelaide Place or wherever. They received their PIN letters. We actually had assistants go out with our iPads and allowed the residents to vote. And then we also went back on election day. So some things can change in those 10 days of period, especially in seniors' homes. New residents move in. So we get those added to the list, the voters list, so they have the ability to vote right up until election day, on election day.
So, excuse me. So what was the results? What percentage actually voted then in the election? Because that's the most important thing. Right?
Actually, yeah.
Yeah, out of the senior homes, when you did all this, what percentage actually voted on election in the election? Do you have that stat?
I'm not sure if we have that stat exactly, but we do know the percentage of voters that voted using kiosks or that would have been located at the help centers or at the long-term care homes.
We also have the demographics, right? The age demographics.
We had electors into their 100s voting, and some of them we knew. So family members of staff who were, excited to vote from the comfort of their home, safety. They didn't have to go anywhere, and they were able to call in using the telephone and dial and register their vote.
So maybe this election afterwards, you could track it and see what percentage actually did vote. I mean, it's a good benchmark to see whether your service is working, right?
Yeah, we don't have yes, we can always improve our service. We don't have a choice because of the Municipal Elections Act. Any home with, I believe, is 25 beds and over, and then there's another category of 50 beds and over. So we have to service them one way or another. And we would go to the home twice. So that's 14 homes, that's 28 visits to make sure that they were on the voters list and had the opportunity to vote. So,
and I'm thanking you for that. Don't misunderstand me. But if you don't take any evaluation afterwards, you don't know whether your effort's working or it's not working.
Yeah,
That's all I'm saying.
I think
right?
it's really difficult to do that because that would be, I think it's an infringement on their privacy at some point, because if we start going into any multiple unit building and counting who's voted and not voted, then that means we're going to start doing it for what, like public housing or something like that. So we don't do that because we have no control, neither do we want to have control over people's ability to do it on their own without us. Because once they get their PIN letter, they're open to vote right then, right? They don't need to wait for us. And many seniors are going to vote on their own without needing us there.
It's just that I have a mother-in-law that's 97 years old. All right. In the last election, she didn't get any paper. She didn't get any PIN, anything. She wasn't asked to vote. So all I'm saying is, if you're not doing any follow-up, you don't know whether your whole service is even working. right? And again, we're here to provide a service, right? That's the purpose. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming to the meeting. Hopefully we provided you all kinds of information. Keely has provided her email address. So if you have questions that you need more clarity on, email her. Also, we have the election email address for the city. So send your questions into us. If we don't know the answers, we'll try to get them for you. But thank you again for coming.